let's applaud our actors as they're leading us once again. Wonderful work. It's on.
Okay.
So this is a feed that's going straight to our video, but we'll all project for you. Excuse me. Oh, I could take those notes back. To the far right, Lorraine Robinson. Lorraine, you directed which play?
That was
In the bowels.
In the Bowels of the Earth.
And next to Lorraine, Vanessa Gilbert, you directed.
A Topol M rocket. Boy, oh boy. And the cat named Brooch. And planting an apple tree.
Beautiful.
Hi, y'all. TDP, temporarily displaced persons.
Thank you, Sam Sherman. And next to Irena.
I directed nothing.
I'm Zoya Kachadurian, and I directed Survivor Syndrome.
Beautiful. Again, our dialect consultant and our journalist and expert who was with us last year and made such a powerful impression in her insights and all she shared. Irena Chalupa was born in northeastern Poland, formerly East Prussia, a member of the Ukrainian National Women's League of America, an organization that's been promoting Ukraine's cause and culture in the United States for nearly 100 years. I won't read the entire biography, but I will say that Irena has worked for the Atlantic Council think tank, was a Fulbright scholar in Ukraine. During her Fulbright tenure, Irena recorded video interviews with former Ukrainian political prisoners and worked in the Dnipro State and Kharkiv, Kazan universities, training students in radio journalism. As a result of her efforts, both universities launched student radio stations, which continue to function to this day. Since 2016, Irena has worked for Stop Faked, fact-checking website launched by the Kiev Mohyla Academy as an an editor and producer responsible for Stop Fake's English language page. And she's a member of the DC area UNWLA branch and is currently the branch chairwoman, also a member of UNWLA, that stands for?
Ukrainian National Women's League of America.
National Executive as liaison. So, Irena, I felt listening to the plays today that we were getting an extraordinary sense, a collective sense of these authors' voice and sensibility. Like they were bringing a gestalt of war and survival to us. It was very felt, I think, with this audience. Tell us what that sensibility is, who remains, who is fighting, who is in Ukraine now, and who do you have in Ukraine now? What does this evening mean to you?
Well, every Ukrainian in the world is fighting. That's what the president of Ukraine says, and that's what we're doing. It's not just the soldiers in Ukraine that are fighting, it's the Ukrainian Americans that are fighting, Canadian Ukrainians, Ukrainians the world over. Everybody is a volunteer, everybody is doing something, whether it's taking in refugees, raising money for drones, raising money for medicines, helping in any way possible. We are a fucking big army, and we are going to win. But I want to go back to art and these plays. You know, war is a terrible thing. And I actually never thought that it would come this close to me, personally. But it has. And, but when I think about it, you know, I came to America in 1967, and there's always been a war somewhere. During my entire life. I came to America, Vietnam was on fire, and then Afghanistan, and then everything else, and then, you know, constant wars and insurrections in Africa, Yugoslavia. There's always been a war. But we live in this country that's surrounded by two big oceans, and nothing flies this far. You know, so we're safe, and we don't feel it. But there's always a war. And war is a terrible thing, but war also is a kind of a painful, bloody, creative catalyst. War drives people to create. And we saw these plays, these fantastic plays. I always remember the fantastic literature from England, from the Great War, from World War I. Siegfried Sassoon, Wilfred Owen, Maria Remarque, All Quiet on the Western Front. Wars give great art because war is such a challenge to the human spirit. And currently in Ukraine, we have a flood of creativity, particularly in the written word. Some of our soldiers in Ukraine are fantastic writers. Two of them in particular flew to Germany to participate in this writers' festival. They both have the same first name but different last names, and they're incredibly talented people. One of them had an op-ed piece about 8 months ago in the New York Times. His name is Artem Chech, and this piece started as a Facebook post, and it was an existentialist post. I know I may die, and I'm ready to die every day, kind of a thing. It was bleak, but it was, brilliant and very, very, extremely, extremely powerful. And they got time off from their army jobs, and they flew to Germany to participate in this festival. And they were actually in New York just last week. I unfortunately wasn't able to make it up there. So war, I'm not going to say that I'm grateful for it, but because I certainly am not, but I am very grateful for this wonderful literature, poetry, art, drama that we're seeing that Ukrainians are creating, because it not only helps to process and somehow, it's a form of catharsis on some level, but it's also testimony. All of this stuff is testimony. And it is something that will stay as part of the Ukrainian canon for years to come.
Wow. Lorraine, I wanted to ask you, and then we'll go pass the mic down, but really, what informed the curation of these 5 pieces? We've read in our program that over 250 plays have been written by Ukrainian playwrights since the outbreak of the war, plays that have been commissioned in many instances by the Center for International Theater Development and distributed through this network of the Worldwide Play Reading Group. And we are all on this shared drive and this fount of material that we all have access to, theater makers all over the world. How did we come to decisions of this, and how did the plays speak to you?
Sure. In this second year of presentation, I know that we work collaboratively. Looking at plays and listening to plays and discussing the ones we picked. Ultimately, with our this wonderful team of directors that we've assembled, but I know that myself, I was really interested in pieces that were, because I'm just my personal interest. I'm always looking for form, looking and interested in form. And so I just was gravitating towards pieces that were very, hopefully very theatrical. And, there are a lot of wonderful, pieces of different types that have been written. There are a lot of pieces in the, that have been gathered for the Worldwide Reading Project that are, poetry and all sorts of, extensive language. I really wanted to see us pick some pieces this year that, had multiple characters, many voices, and again, had a heightened sense of theatricality to the story, which all of these did.
Great. Well, then I'll ask for each of the directors, what did these plays, each of your plays particularly, reveal tonight with an audience, and what kind of connections did you see sort of magically between the piece you directed and other plays in this collection? We'll start with you, Vanessa. You did too, yeah.
Yeah, I did. I did too. I chose the 2 out of the 5 because Ari and Lorraine were gracious to offer us choices, or say, what are you most drawn to? Which is a really preference can make for a very exciting artistic experience. And the two that I chose felt to me like they started talking to each other. One, of course, was in a city, one's in the country, and looking for ways, one, that the internet or the rest of the world is somehow the same, while the main character's personal experience is so altered. And then planting an apple tree is so much about the legacies, generational trauma on that land itself, and this. How do you keep going? It's sort of Beckett, right? How do you go on? You go on, like, I will go on. And the amazing amount of hardship that people in that part of the world and on that particular piece of land, those pieces of land, have endured. And here's a new one. But yet I'm going to talk about a fictional apple, like an apple orchard that I'm going to, but I have to have hope for the future. But all of the sort of discontent, the I can't believe it, sort of all the I can't believe it, the incredible uses of imagination amongst all the 5 plays. And yeah, I will move on. But those are why I chose those 2. But I think these take a couple hearings too, because we're crossing culture for some of us. For me, I don't know where you are all coming here from, but it takes that repeated hearing to make those kinds of connections, and that's been very, very important for this. Maybe you can read them. You want to say, Sam?
Sure. Hey, y'all. So first of all, just super grateful to be up here with these folks. Thank you so much.
It's not doing this.
Oh,
You're just basically.
Oh, great.
You're recording, so you can.
Great.
So just project.
Cool. Awesome.
We're all on Sam's talk.
Yeah. So, just super grateful to be up here. And what I felt was interesting about TDP, or temporarily displaced persons, was that it gave us, a partial perspective of what it was like for someone lending aid from outside of Ukraine. And that was a really fascinating perspective that I felt like we hadn't gotten up until that point. And so, what is that experience like in a immediately neighboring country to have some sort of involvement with what's happening over there? And the kind of just the desperation and the frustration, and then what I love is the way our lovely actor Fatima really channeled what it meant, to be helping all of these people, try to find space to the best of her ability. But then, when she had one favor to ask, of the people she was helping, not one person stood up to help. And I think that illustrates for us some of the hypocrisies we can find ourselves in these real life situations, and again highlights the desperation of these moments. And lastly, I'll say to Irena's point earlier, that there's so much that I think a lot of Americans, we've been so insulated from the spanning of our empire, that I was around here in the summer of 2020, and I saw what that was like. And that's nothing near the scale, obviously, of what's happening in some of these other places, but it's a taste of what's to come if we're not careful. And that's my personal belief. I saw what it was like to see military operations on the White House lawn. And I think that's something we all have to remind ourselves of, that it was happening right down the street. Or that a microcosm of that, and with that in mind, that with regard to how I approach directing this work, that lended itself to experiences like that lend itself to understanding the meaning of solidarity, and so in that work, I really approached it with that in mind, and that was kind of at the forefront of what I was thinking about in this.
And Zoya,
Yeah.
you really dug your teeth into this piece, survivor syndrome, and you can talk a little bit about that process in which you found the script originally as a monologue and how the piece evolved to what it was tonight.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Ari and Lorraine, for bringing me onto this. So the original piece was quite long and was a monologue. Ari, you referred to it as, a stream of consciousness. The playwright is a philosopher, so it was steeped in philosophy. And I was attracted to it, but I said to Ari, to me, I'm interested in it having multiple voices and making it a bit of a tone poem. It was something I'd never done before, and luckily I had permission to do it. Unfortunately, the writer isn't with us for us to negotiate or talk about that. But first I broke it up amongst 3 voices. Lorraine, Ari, and I read it on Zoom, and then I knew who the one main voice of man one, the man in the center, who to me represented the writer, and these other voices to me could represent all the people of Ukraine and women's point of view and angry man as it developed with what you did. And then we did a few trims. The listing of the names of the cities, which I thought was very beautiful, but he listed them. He had one little break in it and he listed them all again. And I said, to me, theatrically, I didn't think that worked. And again, Ari and Lorraine let me do the counterpoint. And, we only had like 4 hours of rehearsal. So I broke it up, and the way I broke it up didn't make sense. And then we made a quick adjustment, and they did that sort of pulse to the man speaking. And what was really exciting for me to see, because I don't do that kind of thing that much, was I could hear the audience as it came around again. Several people went, just the difference of it the second time around. And that was really, really exciting. I just want to say briefly, my parents met, married, fell in love, had a child in World War II in London, and proceeded to have normalcy every day as they were bombed. So this kind of situation in Ukraine particularly related to me. And when the war first started and I saw people dressed just like us, in America we think, oh, everybody else is, somehow different, dressed just like us, with their rollies trying to get to a train, that just imprinted on me. And it's human nature to move on from it, and it's particularly American nature because we are removed, to move past it in the news cycle, and this kind of thing is really important.
Irena, maybe you'll comment on this. Then, of course, we're going to open it up for your comments, questions, your impressions of the evening. But this litany of names, litany of cities, villages, regions, that is recited in Survivor Syndrome, that was orchestrated, scored so beautifully, Zoya, and by your actors. Why is it so effective? What does hearing those names mean for you?
Well, I think it's like a prayer, I recite these names, I recite these words before I go to sleep. It's like, I'm sure that a Holocaust survivor could very easily say, I recite these names, and he'll list all the cities, all the shtetls that were destroyed, and all the places where Jews once lived and no longer do, because they've been erased from the face of the earth. And Bakhmut, which has been at the center of some of the bloodiest fighting. It's like, what is that French, Verdun, where they fought and 200,000 people died, is one of those cities. Will it be rebuilt? Will it just be a memory? And I think that's what this is. It's not forgetting. Not forgetting.
We talked about bearing witness, that the whole evening was bearing witness.
Well, let's take it. I'll be happy to go out to the audience, just for, again, the benefit of the video. If people want to talk about the plays as a whole, or speak to an individual play, or do you have a question of anybody on stage? Who would like to get us started with an impression? Anyone, please.
Speak about bearing witness, I feel. Okay. When you speak about bearing witness, I feel the deep sadness that there's like 30, 40 of us in this small room, and how, and how can we be vessels of sharing this? Because it was so profound. I just feel silenced by it, really. We're friends of Sam Sherman. I knew him when he's a little boy.
How do we get the message out? Irena, what other ways have been effective in spreading the word about awareness of what's happening?
Well, I think that you have to be, I don't know, a shepherd in some godforsaken place where there's no electricity or nothing, not to know about the war. I mean, one of the things about this particular war is that it's an internet war. And it's a war that's beamed into our cell phones directly. Things are noted, things are recorded, things are registered, things are kept for the courts, things are collected for The Hague. Testimony is being gathered every single day. And yes, war fatigue sets in. And particularly in our 21st century sort of society, where we just want everything new, everything's old. We trade in our phones after a year. We want new, and we want to leave everything behind and just move forward very, very quickly without really stopping to think what's happening around us. That is a danger, and it is happening. And one of the things that I dread is that this turns into one of these so-called frozen conflicts, and these occupied territories turn into black holes of human trafficking, drug trafficking, and weapons trafficking, like all of the other frozen conflicts that the Russians have been involved in have become. That's why it's so important for Ukrainians to win. And this war is not just a little local war. It's a big war that's affecting everybody. We've seen what happened with the grain deliveries. We've seen what's happened with various things. I mean, we live in such an interconnected world. And the war in Ukraine is a war of the West. It's a war that everybody who believes in democracy and human goodness should be engaged in some way, and should support the Ukrainians that are trying to win it.
But let me throw again this question and your response back to the rest of the directors. The news of the war, images of the war are ubiquitous. They're ever present on our phones, on our screens, and yet there was something unique about these theatrical pieces. What is unique in the plays, the play you directed, the play you experienced from someone else, that you hadn't been seeing on the news, you hadn't been reading about? Speak to what was special here. Sam.
I think, coming from a generation that's so wrapped up in the internet, so wrapped up in social media, again, I think my generation struggles from a degree of oversaturation. And some of that's not necessarily in our immediate control. That's the way mass media has come to function. But I think it ultimately it dehumanizes conflict. It dehumanizes atrocity. It makes it into something abstract that then is then picked apart by trolls and propagandists who have their own agendas and their own motives. And so I think something that I was just it was so moving again to just be in the company of these artists and touch a bit of that humanity again and reconnect with that. Because again, it reminds me of how being insular is a choice. It's a choice. It's not destiny. It's a choice. And so the way in which I got to observe, these directors at work and my fellow actors at work was across all of these plays. It reinvigorates me. It moves me out of that trap of nihilism, of cynicism. Just as I hope, we hope that it did for many of you tonight. And there is hope. And they will, and Ukraine will win, and that's what I take away.
Go ahead, Zoya.
I just directed a play about a dentist who worked and ended up being Hitler's dentist. And last night, Ari and I saw Here There Are Blueberries, also about that time. And for me, the critical thing of doing live theater and doing this is history is repeating itself. Those of us of a certain age know that. Kids who haven't had civics, who haven't had the right history lessons, and now the movement to block them from reading and block them from learning the right history, the full history.
The real history.
The real history. I mean, we came within inches of it before. So what's going on now, particularly in this country, we need to wake the up. And these kinds of things, last night I thought that's what theater's about, to wake us up, to inspire us, to inform us. And this is that as well.
Let's
Yeah, go ahead.
take a couple more questions and then we'll do one other pass. Who else has an impression or a question? Please, Charlotte.
I think it's the feeling of desperation that each of the plays conveyed, and I'm really interested in how the directors did that, because as we've all been saying, you watch it on the news and you've seen it before and you end up closing your eyes. You couldn't close your eyes here. And especially, I think, the first one where they were experiencing it to begin with, but all of the plays, that emotion, that desperate feeling, which came across to us so well. And I'm interested in if there was something that you did to make that happen. Of course the words, of course the acting, but the directing especially, I'm interested.
Beautiful. So hold on to that question. Who's got one more? Anybody else here? No? Yes. Good.
I mean, I was just thinking about it to go for it or not, but I was like, yeah, why not? So I'm from Afghanistan, and we've been through those days, and with this, the play on syndrome, and also the other one, I'm just going to say the full names of it, survivor syndrome, and then the temporarily displaced persons. I'm one of those person, and I've witnessed those things firsthand. My question was that, one, like when I was just thinking about it, when Iran's revolution happened, the form of music over time really changed from very happy music to something very sad, and it still continues to be like that. Has any patterns you see in the Ukraine here as well, and in the same time, how has these plays, since you started, and how has this evolution actually happened? What were you thinking in terms of plays when the war started? Where are you now, and how do you think this will evolve?
All right.
From the beginning to
How do you direct for desperation? Lorraine, please.
Well, this is certainly something that, the actors and I talked about for In the Bowels of the Earth. First off, just an amazing company of actors that are so wonderful with their gifts and crafts. So they brought a tremendous amount of feeling and depth to it. But we did talk about, where and how we can, heighten that sense of tension and, technical things, picking up cues and really, coming in on next lines, to just kind of make the feel of it be even more compact. And there's so many things going on in the play, so many layers. I really enjoy and am interested in just the internal monologue of the character, and then the awareness of, what's the chaos happening in the community that's in the ground. And then, of course, awareness. And these are other things we talked about as we rehearsed, the awareness of the, violence, tanks, things that are going on outside, and making sure that we're reacting and showcasing those things. But really, it comes down to the wonderful team of actors. So,
Yeah. I don't know how to address the idea of directing desperation into a piece when so many of the pieces are playing around with time. So there's urgency, and certainly we always ask people to play with very high stakes. These are the highest. I mean, if we are imagining into being, we put ourselves back, a year and 4 months to the beginning of the invasion, and it is in the words. It's in, and actually that's partly the translation as well. So translation's tricky. And these work pretty well, but I think it's a huge burst of imagination too, right? We have to have that kind of empathy that is driven by imagination in order to dream into the future we want to see. And these poor folks don't have the energy yet to dream into that, but they do say at the end of Survivor Syndrome, I will do this. But thank you. That's a very kind comment, and I really appreciate you. Did you want to say anything about desperation, or do you want to? Oh, Irena.
I'm not sure that I understood. I'm slightly deaf, so I'm not sure that I even heard the question. How people are processing it and how they're getting on?
No, just in generally, like how these plays when it started.
The plays. Got you.
Yeah.
What you were presenting today versus.
So a little bit more about the structure of the project, the overarching project.
Yeah, I think that's more a question to you guys.
I think you should talk about the commission.
In terms of, we had such very little time. I mean, they sat with selecting the plays, and we had not much time from the time we knew we were doing it, and for me, because I was kind of reshaping it. But I think it's more in this space since we've been here these few days, and the actors bringing their empathy. The only thing I said in my play, to answer your question, is I just said we need to tell people that that's underneath it all, and then as we broke down the things, my wonderful cast sorted it out.
As we're concluding, and we'll ask everybody for a last connection. It was really fascinating to hear these plays next to each other and to pick up on accidental themes, unintended themes. Women on the toilet wearing multiple pairs of pants, experiencing indignity and poised for disruption. The incredibly vivid portraits, women sticking behind to plant seeds, children screaming, hearing sirens, being traumatized by war, asking the most plaintive of questions. Why do they hate us? Why do they want to kill us? Repeated in play after play. I thought that was an amazing conversation that the playwrights were having with each other through these plays. Irena, when we were talking at in your living room this morning, you were talking about the Ukrainians who you connect with in person here in the United States. They're here for a time, they return to Ukraine. I was very struck by that. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, people come and go from Ukraine. The Walter Reed Hospital has been one of the places that has received a lot of Ukrainian soldiers, not just since this latest invasion, but since 2014. So a lot of soldiers have come through to be basically patched up, to get prosthetic devices. I had the honor and the good fortune to be part of, to help translate Senator Tammy, I forget her surname. Duckworth, thank you. Senator Tammy Duckworth and a young man called Alexander Chaika from Ukraine. And they were... Ukrainians have a great sense of humor, and one of the things that has accompanied this war has been really fantastic humor, and I saw some of that between Tammy Duckworth and this Ukrainian guy. As you know, she's a double amputee. He was injured all the way up, and like part of his hip bone is gone. So his prosthetic device was very, very specific, and it needed and they're also very expensive, these things. Anyway, so he's like this bionic man. And there they are. They're taking them off, and they're sort of doing weird things with them, and they're sort of, and they're, well, I can do this, and you can do this, and they're standing, hanging on to bars and just turning them inside out. And I realized, I'm being introduced into a world that I know absolutely nothing about. And here are these people who have no legs. And they're funny, they're full of life, they're going to have kids, and they're going to live, and they're going to show us that war can damage your body, but it can make your spirit stronger. The things that go through some of these places in two and in a third place, the earth plays such a strong role, right? They're in the bowels of the earth, under the earth will protect them. And the deep earth, they eat earth. Actually, they eat earth in the Gabriel Garcia Marquez. There's a character in 100 Years of Solitude who keeps eating earth all the time.
In the South as well.
Yeah, and the orchard, the apple orchard, is all about earth, and earth is mentioned in one other place. And it reminded me of something that I just heard the other day. I listened to an interview with a Ukrainian soldier who's a reconnaissance guy, and he's a military spy, and he had been walking through Bakhmut, and he's describing that the city is dead, basically. It's completely destroyed. But there are cherry trees blooming in the city. All right? Ukraine has, I think, 37% or 33% of the black earth that the entire planet has. This earth is black, well, not only because it has nutrients, but it probably has more blood in it than any other place in the world. And so this earth gives people pause, and this earth gives people strength. I don't know any Ukrainian who doesn't like to get his hands dirty in the earth. I mean, that's one of the things that I do to stop from killing my husband and going crazy. So it really helps. And I think this earth is going to be one of the main players in the rebuilding and the rebirth of Ukraine.
That's perfect.
Final words.
That's it. What do you think? The earth. If
Lorraine,
you want
you got
final
anything to
words.
add?
But
I don't think I can.
Yeah, I can't talk about it.
All right. You brought down the house. So we really want to thank our actors, we want to thank our directors, we want to thank Irena, and mostly we want to thank the Arts Club of Washington. Great staff, great leadership. Thank you for hosting us again, Dorit. Thank you for